So, good morning and welcome. My name is John Davis. I'm Chief Executive of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association UK, CPA UK, and I'm very pleased to have with me today Maria Miller MP. Welcome.
Hi.
Maria, thanks for taking time to speak to us. You were involved, I know, in one of the debates earlier this week, one of the first debates in the Commons under the new sort of hybrid system happening because of the COVID crisis, I think on the domestic abuse bill. I wonder whether you can tell us a little bit about how that went.
Well, I think what we've tried to do in the UK Parliament is to get up and running in as much as we can with the emergency that we face. So Parliament is currently running 3 days a week. And on Tuesday, we were able to, for the first time, have a debate on a piece of legislation, a really important piece of legislation which has been making its way through the parliamentary process for well over a year, and that was on domestic abuse. And it's not perfect, but at least we were able to get, more than 80 people applied to take part in the debate. Significantly fewer than that were able to take part, but we were able to get the debate done. We were able to get the bill into committee to show that actually, regardless of the challenges we face, we are able to deal with some legislation, even in these difficult times.
And as a sort of, I think you pretty much led off the debate. Anything particularly challenging about doing it in that format for you, sort of leading off?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the thing that's lacking is spontaneity. There's no ability to be able to be sort of investigative, to scrutinise what ministers are saying in their opening statements or indeed their closing statements, or challenge things that are being said by other participants. And that is a real deficit. And anybody who feels that we could go on having remote parliaments really doesn't understand the way Parliament works. It's suboptimal, but it's better than nothing. My feedback to the clerks, who've done a phenomenal job in getting this up and running so quickly, is that we do need to look for ways of trying to increase the spontaneity of debate. Otherwise, we won't get the richness of conversation that usually goes on in Parliament.
Yes, interesting. We've heard that from a couple of other members we've spoken to. And so, as you say, that's a piece of legislation which has been working its way through for some time now. Is it clear what happens next in the new hybrid system with a piece of legislation like that?
Well, I don't think there's any flexibility in what happens next. It has to go through all of the stages in both parliaments. So the next stage for our parliament will be to go into a scrutiny committee. Quite how that works in practice, I don't know, but it will be a committee. And in many ways, those sorts of committees have already been running, the select committees have been running those sorts of sessions where there's much more interaction between members and the individual that they're interviewing. So I'm hopeful that actually a committee stage of a bill where there's far fewer members involved will actually be more productive.
Yeah, and do you think, so you mentioned some of the challenges there about lack of spontaneity. Are some of the changes that are coming, whether it's in the chamber or in committee work that you've seen or been involved with, anything which you think actually this is something we perhaps could keep or should be able to do more of, even in, quotes, more normal times?
Well, actually having a list of who's going to speak in the UK Parliament will be an enormous step forward for reasons which I've never really understood. It's been a closely guarded secret as to who's going to speak and when they're going to speak, which can be very frustrating and really not very good for the productivity of MPs. So I wholeheartedly hope Mr. Speaker decides to keep his speaking list, and he'll certainly get my vote if he does that.
Very good, because of course the Lords, I think, already has done that for some time, hasn't it? I think.
Well, indeed, and not really much reason why we shouldn't do so in the Commons as well.
Yes. Have you been involved in any committee discussions yourself, or been able to see how those are working yet?
I'm a member of the Administration Committee, and the Administration Committee looks after the services that run the House. So incredibly important at this time, very well chaired by Sir Charles Walker. And we've been meeting with the Chief Clerk and the Chief Executive of the Commons, really not just to ask how things are going, but also put our own suggestions in for areas they need to look at. So the committees are working, I think, actually quite well. And another thing we may want to take forward from this is encouraging remote participation in committees, which sometimes, depending on what day of the week they run, can be difficult for all members to participate in. But that could be something we take forward as well.
Because it's interesting, going back finally to the theme of the bill you were discussing on domestic abuse. I mean, I've heard members talk in the past about how, especially for some people who might want to give evidence to a committee, coming to the Houses of Parliament for various reasons is a real challenge. So perhaps there are some systems that might help, particularly with witnesses who might find that quite intimidating.
Well, it was interesting you say that. When I chaired the Women and Equality Select Committee, we took remote evidence from people who were overseas. And whilst it was invaluable, because we would have never been able to get that evidence otherwise, it would have been far, far better for them to be there in person. Because again, what we were unable to do was to get that spontaneity of witnesses actually giving their views and then bouncing off each other, which sometimes can be the most revealing part of an evidence session. So I think there's always drawbacks with these things and always advantages. So we've just got to, I think probably flexibility in the House of Commons structure is something that we need, and something that hasn't always been there in the past.
No, I hope it's one thing that'll come out of what CPA is trying to do during this crisis is to help our Parliament both tell others what they're doing, but also to see what is happening around the Commonwealth more broadly, because there will no doubt be good ideas and solutions happening out there, as you know, in jurisdictions large and small.
Yes, and I think the other thing is that it's unlike almost anything else, is it's a shared experience. We're all going through the same challenges, albeit in different ways with different repercussions. But the challenge of trying to get under control the spread of this virus is something that is a common problem we're all facing. So being able to share that, I think, will not only help us, come together as parliamentarians, but also hopefully come up with good ways to deal with this so we can all move forward and cope with it well in the future.
Indeed. And meanwhile, I mean, obviously, as we speak, you're in your constituency, and that for any MP is a huge part of their job at the best of times. How are you finding the constituency work in these challenging times?
Well, like every MP, quite overwhelming. Hundreds of emails to deal with people really asking extremely important information which results from the government's announcements. So all of my staff are working at home, for which I'm enormously grateful, and they don't all have the luxury of large accommodation to live in, and half my staff are in London as well. So, real challenges for your staff to deal with these things, but all of them absolutely rising to that challenge so that we can make sure that constituents have the best information possible. It isn't easy, and it has required people to work in different ways, but I think the flexibility of House and Commons staff is a real strength. They're already used to having to work through general elections, dealing with constituencies' requests through that. So, this just really is one of their strengths.
Maria, finally, you're very involved with the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians from the UK Parliament and have met recently with members from all around our region. Any thoughts on whether there are particular angles for either women parliamentarians or women more generally in this crisis that you and other parliamentarians need to be thinking about?
Well, undoubtedly, the challenge of caring responsibilities through a crisis like this is something which will disproportionately fall on female parliamentarians. I've been privy to wonderful Zoom calls with ministers with children on their laps because actually they've got nobody else to look after that child. So those are real practical difficulties. But I think that as Commonwealth parliamentarians, Parliamentary Association members, we need to be looking as well at the challenges that will face women after this. You know, those that will need to have support and, you know, hopefully encouragement as well to think about taking the experience they may have got from this crisis, volunteering, helping in their community, and translating that into standing for election and actually being part of the debate on how we handle these things in the future. I've been incredibly impressed by the women in my constituency who have stood up and have taken responsibility for helping the community function. Overwhelmingly women, actually. And, you know, and I think, you know, translating that into an energy to stand for election, for me, will be a priority.
That's great. That's good to hear. Maria, thanks very much for your time today. If we may, perhaps we'll come back to you at a later stage. But for now, thanks very much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.